Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're doing another video to help you improve your chess. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. In the games that I played against the computer, I do it live so you can hear me think out loud. But in today's video, I played an interesting game out loud for a student a couple days ago on Christmas. And it was actually an interesting game that I'd like to show you. And I haven't done wonderfully well against Betho recently, despite the fact that I have a fantastic rating advantage over her. What happens is if you play all her book moves, she gets to get out of the opening okay. If you trick her and play bad move order, usually she'll just play silly and you can beat her. But I was trying to play, the good openings. And I asked my student before this game started, do you want me to try to trick Betho and get her to play the openings badly, or do you want me to go right into her book? And my student said he wanted me to play into the book, so I did. So let's take a look at the game, and I'm going to use Stockfish 10 as an analysis tool just to show you what I'm doing. I'll move it up for a second. So I'm going to click Analysis here on the ICC. I'll click Start. I'll move it so I can see more than one line, like top two moves and so on. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be using the computer to analyze the game. Let me bring that back off of the window. You can see some of the analysis sometimes on the right side of the screen. But in any case, let's take a look at my game. All right, so the computer played e4, and I asked my student what he wanted me to play, and he said Sicilian. So I said Sicilian, okay. Knight f3 offering open Sicilian. So I said, all right, well, a lot of times I like to play the Sicilian for knights. It's a little bit less known. We could play any variation we wanted. Sometimes I play the queen b6 variation after knight c6. So my student suggested I play a Najdorf, so I did. d6, d4, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6, the Najdorf Sicilian. Okay, so when I was playing Najdorf so many years ago, the main line was bishop to g5, which I know pretty well. Fischer was playing bishop c4. The third move was bishop e2, and occasionally people played f4. But people never played the English attack with bishop e3 and f3, or f3 and bishop e3. So I don't know that as well. And sure enough, Betho chose to play that. And last time I played against this, I played it wrong and got a bad position out of the opening. I played e5, and the main move here is knight to b3, in which case you're supposed to play bishop to e6. But in this game, Betho played the rare line knight f3, where bishop e6 is not as good now because of moves like knight to g5. So I played the main move bishop e7, and that kind of took me out of my book already. I have an idea where to put my pieces, but not specifically. And here Betho played a move that I was sure was not book anyway. Betho plays bishop to c4. Now the general rule here is if White puts a piece on d5 and I can make him recapture with the pawn, then that blocks the other pieces and lets me play f5, and that's good for black. But if he can keep recapturing on d5 with a piece, then I have that backward pawn and that weak square that he's occupying. So for instance, here a move like b5 would not work, because he could just play bishop d5, and if knight takes d5 to win the bishop pair, knight takes d5, and he's got the best minor piece on the board. So, and I have to watch out a little bit because my rook is a little weak in that kind of position. I think the computer here suggests I could play castles, but I also played another move that the computer says is good, which is kind of the obvious queen c7, hitting the bishop on c4. The drawback of making that move is now when he plays knight d5 later, he'll be hitting my queen, which gives me even less options of what to do. But other than that, the queen on c7 is a good move. And now the computer should play bishop to b3 with a nice opening advantage. Instead, the computer plays the very terrible looking b3, pinning his bishop to the knight on c3. But here, if I play b5 right away to try to skewer the pieces, White can simply play knight to d5 hitting the queen, and the queen, of course, can't take on c4 because it's guarded by the bishop, and that just doesn't work. b5, knight d5, bishop takes d5, bishop b7, and now White can keep capturing on d5 with pieces, and Black doesn't have a terrible position, but this is not the best line for me. So I looked at bishop e6 with the idea that if I played bishop e6 and he plays bishop takes e6, maybe I can play queen takes c3 check. Bishop d2 is forced to attack the queen to give him time to save the bishop on c4. And here I could play queen c6, hitting the e-pawn twice. And that would be good for me. I don't think I calculated this perfectly. So in this case, white should not take the bishop. He should again play the same idea, knight to d5. And now if I take, bishop takes, he could take with the pawn or the bishop. Let's say he takes with the bishop. I take with the knight. And now he could take with the queen or the pawn, and the game is about even. So I was trying for a little bit more than this. So I decided I couldn't play b5 because of knight d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, hitting f7 and hitting the rook. So therefore I decided to castle first so that any recaptures on d5 with the queen would not double attack anything. So I castled. All right. White still needs to worry about possibilities of these skewers, but I don't really have any tactics to do that yet. So white plays the strange move rook c1. That's definitely a Betho kind of weak move. And in the long run, the rook on the same file with the queen and the possibility of moving both those pieces and playing c4 might work, but right now, that's too early. So white should have just either guarded the knight with a move like queen d2 or queen d3, or, maybe just castled. So again, I thought for a while, and I looked at bishop e6. Same ideas as before. He could still play knight d5. So I played knight bd7. If you look at my clock, I took 7 minutes on this move. I felt it was critical to figure out the right move order for developing the pieces here. And Stockfish says that knight c6 is my best move with a slight advantage to black. Doesn't think that knight bd7 is a mistake. Thinks that white should just castle with a typical white advantage here. If white castled, I was thinking now of playing a move like b5 because I can take on d5 and then play bishop b7 and then hit d5 again with knight f6 or knight b6. So I thought this move order was okay for me, and it is. And here white plays knight d5 right away, hitting the queen. And Stockfish says my best move is queen to d8, which I hardly considered. It's almost never right to put the queen back and just guard the bishop here. So I really didn't strongly consider that move. I did look at queen a5 check, and I rejected it because of b3, which not only attacks the queen, but also guards the pawn on a2, and my bishop is hanging on e7. So queen a5 check doesn't do anything. So therefore, I pretty much decided I was going to have to take the knight, which at 27 ply the engine thinks is almost as good as queen d8. So I took the knight, and I thought here that the engine, Betho should take back with the bishop. And indeed, Stockfish says that's the best move. And Betho takes with the queen. And now black has a pretty big advantage because now I can attack the queen with the knight and also attack the e-pawn, and then I can attack the bishop with b5. And I'm going to get a lot of white square play here in the next few moves. So I play knight f6, which is as good as anything. It took me another 6 minutes to play that move. Again, we're in a fairly critical part of the game because even though we're in the opening, he's not castled. And I have some tactical threats now against the e4 pawn. So I want to make sure that I'm going to get the advantage here if I play it right. So he plays queen d3 to protect his e-pawn. And I play b5, and now he has to play bishop d5, hitting the rook. And of course, I'm going to take that bishop. And now he has two choices. He can take with the queen, or he can take with the pawn. If he takes with the pawn, I'm going to get my majority rolling with f5. You can see I have a majority by drawing a line between the E and the F files. If you draw a line between the E and the F files, I have 4 pawns on the king side, and he has 4 pawns on the queen side. But right away, I have that 2-on-1 majority on the E and the F file, and I'm controlling the entire center, besides threatening e4 winning a piece. So my pawn structure is much better, and I have the bishop pair. That's a very typical way of playing this. Remember, before the game started, or early in the game, I said, if you can get white to recapture on d5 with a pawn, then playing f5 is going to give black a good game. And it's also, that would convert this d6 pawn from being backward on the semi-open file to being not backward and completely shielded. I know some people think that if white takes here, that this is a backward pawn, but it's not, at least not according to most definitions. A backward pawn is not a pawn that can't move, and it's certainly not the same thing as the back pawn of a pawn chain. Here the pawn on d6 is the back pawn of a pawn chain, but it's not backward. But if white takes with the queen, this pawn is backward, because if you take all the pieces off the board, the pawn can move, but if he moves, he would lose material to another pawn, and that's pretty much the signifying factor of a backward pawn. If you're not sure about what I'm saying here, I have an earlier video called What's a Backward Pawn, which I think is a really good video. So you can check that out on my channel. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, YouTube/C/Dan Heisman Chess, you can subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. And so this earlier video talks about the backward pawns. And in this game, of course, Betho does take with the queen. And now I can hit the queen and the e-pawn with bishop to b7, gaining time. And then the queen's going to go back and guard it. So this is a position where black has a tremendous advantage if he finds the right idea here. And if you would like to take this as a quiz, you can pause the video and see what black's best move is here. So take some time and see if you can figure out black's best idea here, which I found, luckily. Okay, well, I showed this to one of my students who was rated in the mid-thousands, and he said I should play queen a5 check and then take the a2 pawn. And it's true, playing queen a5 check and then taking the a2 pawn is okay, but it is a little tricky. You know, white can take bishop d2, queen takes, and now the queen is stuck in the corner a little bit. So even though if white plays perfectly here, black's got a nice advantage, it's a little tricky to play for black. So if this was your answer to win the pawn on a2, you get some credit in the sense that it's not the best idea, but it's not a bad idea. But in order to, come ahead with the pawn here, you've got to play very carefully on the next half dozen moves or so. All right, let's go back to the game. So I played the best move here, and the best move is the break move, f5, simply threatening f takes e4, winning a piece. And white is embarrassed here. White can't take the pawn on f5 because e4 wins a piece anyway. He's got no check on d5 or c4. So if he can't play e takes f5 here, what else could he play? Well, he could guard the pawn with the knight and move the knight. He could play here, but then I would win the bishop with f4, trap the bishop. So he could play knight g5. And I looked at this line, and I decided I had two ways of playing this. I could just play bishop takes g5, and then take on e4. It gives me opposite colored bishops with up a pawn, but opposite colored bishops in the middle game is not the same as opposite colored bishops in the endgame. In fact, it should be quite winning for me. I also looked at an interesting line here where I would play f takes e4, knight takes e4, and then d5. And now again, white would have to play something like knight g5, threatening the fork. And now I could play e4, and now he can't play knight to e6 because I can play something like queen d6, hitting the knight and hitting the queen and winning a piece. So he'd have to play like queen to d2. And now I've got this tremendous center with the bishop pair. And here Stockfish says the best line for me would be to play bishop takes, and the crazy move e3 with line clearance. And after bishop takes e3, sack another pawn with d4. And if queen takes d4, just bishop takes g2. And that king that's stuck in the center is going to come under heavy pressure on the white squares. All right, let's go back to the game. So, and of course, if white simply stops the fork by moving the queen, let's say white plays queen to e2. Well, I can just take the pawn, and if white plays back knight to d2, I can get that big center rolling with d5. And I'm up a pawn with a massive advantage here. I think Stockfish says about 5-pawn advantage. So Betho saw a lot of this and realized that she was losing and kind of gave up resistance here. So the rest of the game is a lot less interesting after Betho's next move. Betho simply plays c4, giving me the fork, and that's what I had to check. I had to check if I play f takes e4 and he plays c takes b5, hitting the pawn, does he have any tricks here? Sometimes Betho has tricks. And I took a while to make sure there were no tricks. If we look at my clock, I took about a little over 2 minutes for that move. So I played f takes e4, and white didn't even attack the queen. He just moved his queen, her queen. And I said, okay, well, I got to take off the knight before it runs away. So I take off the knight. I'm up a piece with the bishop pair. White plays g3. All right, when you get positions like this, a lot of my students sometimes lose games in positions like this because they get so overconfident that they sit there and they say, oh, I can do anything and I can win, and they don't even watch what the opponent's doing. I actually play exactly the opposite. When I get this far up, I don't really care how I'm going to win. I'm going to win with any kind of reasonable sequence. I'm just worried about how he would win if I wasn't paying attention. Because if I stopped his only ways of getting back in the game, I have a million ways to win. I'm going to stumble across one of them anyway. And this has worked for me very, very well over the years. When you're killing people, it's way more important to make sure they can't get back in the game. In fact, I have the 6 things that I do when you're way ahead. If you want to hear more on that, you can go back to my video on that. But the 6 things are: think defense first, which is what I was just talking about. It doesn't mean you play passively or defensively. You just look and see what he can do and make sure he can't do anything to get back in the game. Make sure that if he doesn't have anything to get back in the game, you can play all the offense you want. Number 2 is trade pieces, but not necessarily pawns. It's always good when you're up material to trade pieces. Number 3 is keep it simple. Actually, I usually call that number 2 because complications always favor the losing player who has nothing to lose. Number 4 is use all your pieces all the time. Number 5 is don't worry about the little things. And number 6 is avoid unnecessary time trouble. You've got a big margin for error. You don't need to run your clock right down to 0 like you would if the game was competitive. So here I said, well, if he castles, if I can get my queen on that diagonal, I can checkmate him. So I simply got my queen out of the discovered attack and put him on d7. So white plays c5, and the d-pawn is pinned. I can't take it because I lose my queen. And he's not threatening to fork me because I have 2 pieces on the c6 square. So I just go past and push my passed pawn right down the board. White plays queen to b2, hitting my e-pawn. I decide to save it by playing d4. He saves the bishop by playing bishop d2. And now I take my only piece that's not in the game, use all your pieces all the time, and I play rook a c8, putting another piece on that c6 square. So that pawn majority of white's is not going anywhere. Okay, so white plays bishop b4, guarding the c5 pawn. And I simply play bishop c6, blockading it. I'm just waiting. Not worried he can't castle kingside because of queen h3. And otherwise, I'm just going to play my center pawns right down the board and win. You notice I've sped up at this point because I'm up a piece. I'm just playing very, very carefully. He attacks my a6 pawn. The question is, do I want to save it? The answer is no. If he takes that pawn, he can't easily create passed pawns on the queen side, and it would put his queen out of play on the defensive. So I just played e4, threatening e3. If he wants to play queen takes a6, getting his queen out of the defensive area, that'll make it that much easier to beat him in the center. So Stockfish sees that he can't take the pawn yet and tries to stop my move e3 by playing bishop d2. At this point, e3 is still my number 1 candidate move because after e3, f takes e3, f2 check, the king would have to go to a white square, and then my white squared bishop and my queen could start attacking him. I wouldn't even take the rook on h1 in that kind of position because my bishop's better off attacking the king than it is winning the exchange. So I do play e3. with the idea of f takes e3. I'll play f2 check, followed by all kinds of things on the white squares. White sees that and decides just to put the bishop back where he was before. So now I could open up the center with e takes f2 check. Every move wins here. You just have to be careful. So I think at this point, Stockfish is saying that if I played perfectly, I've got like a mate in 20 or something. Right now, Stockfish is at 28 ply, and it says I'm up 38 pawns if I play d3. Well, I didn't play d3. I played bishop g5, which Stockfish says is just as good. And now that I play that move, Stockfish begins to realize there's mates here. So Stockfish now says that I have an unstoppable mate in 11 if I would see it, which of course I wasn't even looking for it. I'm just looking for how to blast open the king and put the game away. All right, so it says White's best move is queen to b2. White plays rook c2. And now the engine says queen f5 is mate in 8. I didn't see that, of course. I wasn't looking for it. I'm just looking for how to open up the center and get my bishops and my rooks and my queen near his king. I take the pawn to open up the line. The idea is if he takes with the king or the rook, I can play bishop e3. He takes with the rook. Computer says I still have mate in 10 with rook fe8 check, which is reasonable. I played bishop e3. Stockfish says, what a blunder. You had mate in 10 and now you're only up 22 pawns. Excuse me. 23 pawns now. Okay, so I'm not worried about trying to win as fast as I can. I'm more worried about how I'm going to win the game. I'm more worried about making sure I'm going to be able to win the game safely without him coming back. Little throat clear there. All right, so bishop e3, hitting the rook. Everything wins. He finally does take the pawn. I'm not worried. I decide to push my d-pawn down the board. And he castles. So I looked at the board and I said, his rook on f2 is pinned, so he's not really guarding g2. If I threaten queen h3 and threaten queen g2 mate, what in the world would he do? So I looked at queen h3 and I said, what's his only defense against queen g2 mate? It's to play king to h1. So then I looked at queen takes f1 check, rook takes f1, f2 check, but he can play queen takes c6 and sack the queen back, and it's not mate right away. So then I looked at the other check, queen h3, king h1, queen g2 check, and I said, oh, after rook takes g2, f takes g2 is mate, because I'm attacking him with a pawn, the bishop's guarding g1, and he can't capture the pawn on g2. At that point, I then said to my student, I'm not going to play it right away. I'm going to check it 3 or 4 times, because if it's mate, the game's going to be over. So why would I want to make the move real fast? That doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to take my time and make sure it's really mate. So I played queen h3, and as expected, the computer played king h1. And again, it would be a big mistake to say, well, I already calculated this. Queen g2 is mate. I call that the ABC error. Just because you calculated A and you thought if he does B, you can do C, then when you do A and he does B, you should not play C right away. You should recalculate it, make sure it's really as good as you thought it was. You wouldn't believe how many student games I've seen them lose where they take 3 or 4 minutes on a move, they make a move their opponent makes the obvious reply, and then they make the move that they calculated, which is a tremendous mistake, and they lose, and I say, why did you play that move so fast? And they say, because I calculated on the previous move. And then I say to them, but just because you calculated the previous move doesn't mean you shouldn't recalculate at each move. So what happens is they're playing a very good move A, their opponent is playing a very reasonable defense B, and then they planned on playing C. The problem is that A was a good move, but their second move, C, is a terrible move. And they do it right away because that's what they had planned. Well, even if C is a good move, there may be better moves, C prime, that you can play. Here it's checkmate, so there's not going to be any better moves. But again, I did take some time. Let's see how much time I took on this move. I took 28 seconds, so I calculated it a few times to make sure that queen g2 was mate. And I played queen g2. He has to take, and I take with the pawn with a very pretty checkmate. All right, let's go through the game real quickly again. Nice win by me. Haven't always been winning nice against Betho lately. That's what happens when you get older. I'm a big favorite, but still got to be careful. If you stick your head in the computer's mouth, it'll bite you off. Okay, so rook c1, knight bd7, knight d5, knight takes, queen takes, a mistake. I think Stockfish thinks that's the losing move. Knight f6, good move. Queen d3, guarding the pawn. b5, good move. Bishop d5, knight takes d5, good move. If he takes with the queen, like in the game, I play bishop b7. If he takes with the pawn, I play f5. Takes with the queen, bishop b7, guarding the rook. Queen back, f5, exclamation point. Basically putting the game away. Black is winning. White decides, oh, it's bad in all lines and just gives me a piece. Thank you very much. Now it's just mop-up time. Just be very careful. Don't let him fork you on c6. Get your rook in the game. Get ready to push those center pawns. Here they come. Get the bishop out of the way so the e-file's open and the bishop's doing something. Open up the lines. He takes a pawn. Here comes the center. He castles into a mating attack. And a pretty finish. Okay, so I'm proud of that game. So that's my Christmas game. Do I give lessons on Christmas? Yeah, as long as we're not in the middle of a party or something. So, yeah, that game was played during a lesson on Christmas. Actually, my student was in Shanghai. So even though it was Christmas for me, it wasn't Christmas for him. It was Christmas night for me, and I think it was the next day in Shanghai. So it wasn't a Christmas lesson for him. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's game. For my YouTube channel, this is Dan Heisman. I can see my top of the board is a little cut off here. Sorry about that when I moved it back up. Didn't mean to do that. All right, hopefully you were able to see the first rank okay, to see the whole game. There you are. If you didn't, let's do it one more time before we cut off the video. Now that I have the whole board on there. Okay. And checkmate. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. We'll have some good videos we've already had on the channel, and we'll hope to put some more instructive ones on in the near future. Have a great holidays. I'm taping this video between Christmas and New Year's, so hopefully you're having a great time. And if you don't see it till way after Christmas to New Year's, have a great time anyway. Thanks. See you next time. Bye.